Welcome back to the channel. So today I really want to talk about a rather spicy topic, I guess you could say, and that is the difference between asking for space in a relationship and stonewalling. So I guess just to start off with, I really wanted to set the scene. So I guess what I'm really talking about is a relationship where it seems to be going along smoothly and then suddenly it isn't. And suddenly something happens and you're not sure what the hell it was. And suddenly you find yourself in a really difficult, challenging, distressing rabbit hole with your partner. And suddenly they're asking for space and you're sitting there kind of a bit flabbergasted, a little bit unsure of what's just happened, all that sort of stuff. And I guess in that sort of context, when perhaps things get really heated in a relationship situation and one partner asks for space, that can seem pretty reasonable. It might seem a bit confusing, but it can seem reasonable given that the relationship has just taken a hit. And I guess what I'm really talking about is what we refer to in emotionally focused couples therapy as the pursuer withdrawer dance. So if you've watched any of my previous videos, I've talked a bit about attachment theory, attachment styles. Pretty well known. A lot of people are very well versed in attachment styles, but if you're not, I would recommend going back and having a look at some of my other videos, or just do a search online. You'll find tons of information about the 4 different attachment styles. But what I most often find as a couples counselor with couples who are coming in for help, basically, in their relationship because they feel like they're in this never-ending gridlocked cycle, is a combination of an anxious partner and an avoidant partner, which is what I was saying before, what we refer to in emotionally focused therapy as withdrawer pursuer. So I guess it's fairly self-explanatory, but for those who don't know, the anxious partner is more the pursuer and the avoidant partner is more the withdrawer. And what can happen with this pairing is that the anxious partner may feel a sense of disconnection, may feel a sense of separation in the relationship with their avoidant partner. And that is likely to trigger some kind of subconscious or perhaps, semi-conscious fears around rejection, abandonment, withdrawal, all those kind of things. And so a common scenario that plays out is that the anxious pursuer partner is starting to feel that sense of their partner pulling away, that sense of, impending rejection, etc. And so they reach out and say something like, hey, I was just thinking that maybe we could go away this weekend. But what they're really asking is, hey, I'm feeling the need for closeness. I feel disconnected from you. I want to feel close. Are you willing to feel close with me? And then the avoidant partner just often sees it as a purely logistical question, that their partner is asking them, what are you doing this weekend? And they just reply something like, oh, sorry, I've already got plans with friends, or yeah, I don't really want to do anything, just kind of tired. And that sort of really activates the anxious pursuer partner's fear even further, and they start to get even more triggered, and they may start to get really distressed or get critical of their partner and say, oh, well, that's just perfect. You never want to spend time with me anyway, so why do I even bother? Or just get really upset, or, any number of kind of defenses basically to essentially give the message, hey, I'm reaching out here and I just feel like you've completely knocked me back. You don't seem to understand that I'm reaching for you and you're just rejecting me. And so now I'm going to get louder, and now I'm going to really show you my distress, but I'm not going to do it in a way that is vulnerable and makes sense for you. And so what the avoidant partner is basically hearing is, well, you've fucked up, you've done something wrong, you're not good enough, there's something wrong with what you're doing, so it comes across as essentially a criticism. And then the situation just spirals because the anxious partner is going to hear that as even more rejection, even more abandonment, especially if the avoidant partner is becoming defensive, which is likely in a lot of situations, or just becoming very dismissive and shutting down, giving minimal answers or even just disappearing completely. And then comes the very classic phrase, yeah, I just need some space, from the avoidant partner. And that one sentence is usually enough to send absolute chills and fear down the anxious partner's spine. And, it just goes down the rabbit hole from there. And, the anxious partner winds up feeling very confused, hurt, alone, isolated, all those really challenging things. And the avoidant partner feels just kind of criticized and set upon and doesn't know where it all came from, and perhaps even very blindsided by the anxious partner's sudden reaction. So if you've experienced this in your relationship, you've probably been nodding as I've been recounting this kind of example, and I'm certainly not laughing in any way to make light of it. It's more just that it's a very common experience for a lot of couples experiencing distress in their relationship. That kind of anxious avoidant dance or pursuer withdrawer sort of dynamic that plays out. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that if that's playing out in your relationship, you're certainly not alone. And it's exactly the sort of dynamic that couples counseling is designed to really help with, especially emotionally focused therapy. So I guess that's an example of when space is being requested within the distress of a relationship. And it's not because the avoidant partner doesn't care, that they're, apathetic to their partner's distress, that they don't want to work on things, that they don't want a good relationship, they don't want to fix any conflict or rifts that come up with their partner. It's more so that for an avoidant person, big, messy displays of emotion are scary, or they just signal some sort of sense of danger. They've never been taught to be present with big displays of emotion, and they may even, in some cases, have reason to be very fearful of them. So their go-to sort of instinctive reaction is to shut down, maybe put up walls, become defensive in response to that. And I think I covered this as well in my last video on empaths and attachment. So, because we were looking at empaths as mostly being in the anxious avoidant attachment style. So if you didn't catch that one, I'd recommend going back and having a look at that, because that's very interesting as well. So I guess what I'm trying to say really is that asking for space in that scenario is in no way, shape, or form, ill-intended, if that makes sense. So it's not actually coming from a malicious place. It's coming from a place of overwhelm. It's coming from a place of confusion. It's coming from a place of fear of saying or doing the wrong thing and further hurting or jeopardizing their partner or the relationship. It's just that it may come across as quite cold or dismissive or even punishing to their partner, who is, the more anxious type. So, but I guess it's still within the realms of very normal. It's a very normal sort of interaction that I'm describing there of a relationship of that kind of pairing, the anxious avoidant pursuer withdrawer sort of pairing. But now this is where it gets tricky and a bit dangerous. In instances where there is a narcissist in the relationship, asking for space is not about asking for space. It's not innocent. It's not because of overwhelm. It's not because of confusion. And it's actually because of control. Because narcissists, as we know, seek having control over their partner. Well, anyone in their life really, but especially their partner, their intimate partner. So when a narcissist perhaps does or says something, behaves in a certain way that perhaps they know is going to create drama and chaos with their partner, by intentionally upsetting them. And then their partner reacts and gets emotional, especially if they are on the more anxious side of the spectrum. And let's face it, I think a lot of narcissists probably choose more anxious partners, but I might make a video on that because that's another piece of the puzzle. Not just empaths, but perhaps people who are anxiously attached tend to be the target of the narcissist. So in that situation where the anxious partner is then reacting to the narcissist's provocation and becoming emotional, becoming heightened, perhaps getting angry, perhaps saying things that are mean, or, it's a reactive kind of anger or even rage. It's almost like the narcissist weaponizes that, capitalizes on that, and then says, oh, I need space. But they're not asking for space in the way that an avoidant partner would, because they're not seeking to take distance so they can process what's happened, so they can understand, so they can come back and try and fix the situation once they're feeling calmer and more in balance. They're actually seeking to just completely destabilize their partner, to take control, to play mind games, to manipulate. So whether or not a intimate partnership is a narcissistic dynamic or not is a very important factor to consider, because on the surface it might look the same, as when an avoidant partner becomes overwhelmed and asks for space. But as you can see, the motivation is very, very different. And a narcissist is not seeking harmony and to fix the situation. In fact, a big difference between narcissists and avoidant partners is that narcissists crave chaos and drama, even if they're sitting there saying, oh, I can't stand it. Oh, I hate the drama. Oh, you're always just so over the top. That's just them playing a game and manipulating further, because they actually are the ones creating the chaos to start with, but they're doing it in a way that's highly manipulative, that makes the partner feel like they're the one that is the problem, when in fact it's the narcissist who has created it to start with, while standing there in a very hypocritical way saying, oh, you're the one who's too much, and I hate all this drama and I can't stand all your emotions. Narcissists feed off emotional output. Narcissists need to get narcissistic supply, or fuel, as some people call it. And that means feeding off their partner's emotional reactions, feeding off the emotional reactions of people around them, people that are close to them. So it's an entirely different scenario, and it's not something that can actually be worked on. So this is where it becomes incredibly important to identify when you're actually in a narcissistic dynamic versus a healthy, insecure bond with your partner who is an avoidant partner, but essentially they still are somebody who is capable of empathy and understanding and, genuinely cares about the relationship, versus a narcissist who has no genuine emotional empathy and again is just seeking power and control. It's really, really important to know that, because it can make the difference between, a lot of damage being done essentially to the partner, to the victim in the relationship. And I know a lot of people don't like the term victim, and that's understandable, but in the dynamic with a narcissist and their intimate partner, it is actually fairly apt to say that their intimate partner is their victim, because they do prey on people. And, just because I'm calling somebody who's in a narcissistic relationship a victim, it doesn't mean that you have to inhabit that permanently and take on that role, or take on, that identity as a victim. In fact, I think that's what a lot of narcissists do. They take on the identity of the victim, especially the more covert kinds. And, again, that's just a manipulation. But, you don't have to take on the role of victim for the rest of your life. In fact, that's very unhealthy in itself. But for the purpose of just identifying what's going on in that dynamic, it is actually easier to say victim, and that's exactly what it denotes. That's what the dynamic is. That doesn't mean you need to be stuck in it. You can break free. And I guess a big part of me making these videos, along with all the other wonderful creators on YouTube who talk about narcissism, the aim is to help people identify what's going on in their dynamic, if it is a narcissistic dynamic, so that they can be well informed and they can start to break free, because that's the most important thing, really. It's saving people from long-term abuse, psychological damage, because that's not good for anybody. So I hope this is helpful. This is really all I wanted to tackle today on this topic. If you liked what I had to say and it resonated with you, consider giving me a thumbs up, subscribing, and I will see you soon in the next video.